Welcome back, I'm Wavepunk, and this is day 137 of producing for a year. Today we're back on our quest to make drum and bass. I've really enjoyed this journey so far, but it's definitely been much more difficult than I thought it would be. We started out and just I kind of put a bunch of sounds into a track and was able to make something that resembled drum and bass, but I didn't like the way the kick sounded, so I made a new kick in a previous episode. At the time, I thought it sounded better. Now going back and comparing the two, I think I maybe actually prefer the older kick, and while I was glad to have figured out how to make a kick with a sine wave very easily like that, it wasn't at all the sound I was actually going for. So over the last few days, I've been listening to a lot more drum and bass to try and see if I can really pinpoint what is going on with these drums in the drum and bass songs that I actually like. And the drums from those tracks seem a lot more alive, a lot more like real drums, not synth generated drums. So today I just went to YouTube and typed in Metrik drum and bass kick drum to see if I could find anybody describing how to make a Metrik kick drum. And not only did I find somebody talking about his drums, I also, most importantly, found this. Metrik's own tutorial on his track Gravity, one of the tracks we analyzed a few days ago. It's an hour-long video of him breaking down the entire session. If you're interested in making drum and bass, or if you're just interested in making EDM at all, I think this was a very informative thing. And today I just sat and watched the full tutorial, the whole hour, and took a bunch of notes. I've linked his tutorial below. I'm not going to sit here and like play it for you. If you want to watch it, go watch it yourself on his channel. For me, here was kind of my big takeaways from the video. The first thing was more of just like a realization from watching him produce, and I think from watching a few other tutorials of people walking through EDM tracks. I'm realizing I think too simply when it comes to processing. Usually for me, I have a sound being generated by a synthesizer, and in that synthesizer there will be some effects and maybe some filtering and some processing happening there, and then on the track itself I'll put reverb or delay or tremolo or compression, but that's really it. There's effects that are happening in the synth, there are effects that are happening on the channel, and then we're going straight to the master out, and the master out has like a limiter on it, and that's about it. But what Metrik was doing in his videos, he would have all that. He would have the effects in the synthesizer, he would have the effects on the channel, and then that channel would be going to a mix bus, to a dry bus, and also to a effects bus, and that effects bus would have a whole stack of effects in it, and each of those effects you could mix individually to that one channel, and then the dry bus that was at all the channels going out dry, and also all the channels coming out wet as effects. There would be kind of like two bus headers where you could like listen to just the effects or listen to just the dry and like mix that overall mix together, and then those two would go to a third like bus, and then that bus would have more compression and de-essing and EQing and widening, and it was just, there was so many layers of processing going on, and while yes, what those layers are is really what matters more than having the layers. I don't think I should intentionally just complicate my process by putting a whole bunch of effects in a whole bunch of different places just because I've watched other people do it. It is clear that they're not doing that. Metrik's not doing that because he thinks that sounds are better run through a bunch more things. Each one had a purpose, and he would describe each one of them's purpose. I do rarely use groups more than just for organization, and I think I could definitely be using them more for processing and not be afraid to really put big processing. I did a lot of harsh EQing and a lot of things, and I think I could be more willing to just kind of chop things up and have that each sound occupy its own space and be okay with that. There was a few cool like vocal tricks he had. One thing he'd done that I've done before is I'll do two different takes of the melody, and I'll have one be panned left and one be panned right, and it creates this nice kind of width unison type effect. He takes that one step further in the video and has 3 takes, one that is center and one that is hard pan left, hard pan right, and then he has the hard pan left and right pulled down like 10 decibels, so you're still mainly taking that center mono sound, but you still get that wideness with the 3 channels. So that's definitely a technique I'm going to steal. And then he had a few different techniques to add a lot of crispness to this sound. There was a thing called like morphoder, I think, that basically with the way he had it set up, it just accentuated the like harsh edges of the sound, the sort of stuff, the real high crispiness stuff. And I'm not going to go out and just buy a whole bunch of plugins because I watched one tutorial, but this one was when I went to either look for an alternative or kind of understand what he was doing with that tool and see if I can replicate it with another tool. That was one of them. There was also, he did a lot of parallel EQing, and I was always amazed when he would sit there and toggle between the parallel EQs. Oftentimes, if he would toggle on other EQs, I wouldn't hear the effect very strongly, but the parallel EQs really added a lot of width and clarity at the same time. One of my big questions coming out of that video was, do parallel EQs do what I was hearing them do, or was he just using them to add that clarity? I don't know. What is a parallel EQ? How is it different than other EQs? That's a question I'm going to try and answer in future videos. But then he had a few other tools that were really cool. He had a tool called Track Spacer that I think looked like it was like mixing. He would use it with that kind of dry and wet buses that I was talking about. He would use it to like when the signal was like, especially in a vocal chain when the person is singing. He would have the Track Spacer tool would like highlight and lean into the dry signals. You could really hear what they were saying, and then it would nice and cleanly fade in all of the wet on the other side of it. It was kind of like a sidechain compression sort of thing, but it would make it really nice, especially when you want to have a big washy sound of effects going on. More specifically, when it comes to sidechain compression, a very important category of technique in EDM, he was using LFO tool not exclusively for sidechain compression, but more than anything else. And LFO tool is a thing that I've seen in almost every EDM tutorial, and it is surprisingly seems to be the sort of thing that there isn't a good equivalent of. While it seems like a very simple thing, I was surprised to see that Logic doesn't have an LFO tool. And LFO tool is only $50, so I think that if there's going to be the next one thing I'm going to buy, that might be the next thing for me. It seems like a pretty mandatory tool, and it also really does fill a space where I know exactly when and why I would be using it. Sidechain compression always feels too minimal of an effect / too slow of an effect, especially when using Logic's default compressors. It would just, the sound would always, it didn't feel like it was dipping far enough, or it would create a chugging effect the moment I felt like it was actually creating space. And with LFO tool, where you could just literally automate a trigger system, I don't need it to actually listen to the bass drum and then go to the thing I want taken out and take it out. I can just tell it, hey, take it out at the same time the bass drum would happen to be playing, and I can really make it as tight or as not tight as I want it to. So I think that that'll be the next thing I end up doing, is buying LFO tool and using that, because it was infuriating listening to Metrik's tracks and trying to figure out how can I hear the bass and the kick and the snare and all the pads and all the synths without hearing them get in each other's way, and I don't hear any sidechain compression. It was just so cool. So I think the LFO tool seemed to be what he was using, so I'm probably gonna go and grab that. But as far as the drums, right, because that was what I started with, his drums were surprisingly not very processed, and yeah, almost all of them real sounds, real drums, not synth-generated drums. They were very loud, kind of heavy, saturated sounds as well, but I think I'm gonna have to go back to the drawing board a little bit on percussion and see if I can find some good samples of some kicks and snares that I think work really well, instead of piecing through the synth generated ones that I've been making or using. He also added he almost always had some sort of reverb running on his drums. He was always trying to add a little bit of space. Kind of getting into the things we've talked about in previous episodes of like the drum doesn't really live in a place until you put reverb on it. And even in EDM, a computer generated genre that doesn't technically happen in spaces, he still found it really important to put even just a small amount of like room reverb. So something I'll definitely experiment with moving forward. But that feels like it would make the drums more muddy, so it clearly didn't with him. So yeah, I gotta keep on looking at that. He had a few times where he took like a techno drum break and like sped it up to drum and bass tempo, and then like whacked out EQs all over it to kind of meld it down into this little small space, and that was kind of a cool way to make a break. So I might borrow some of those techniques. But yeah, I don't know, I've been rambling for a while here about how cool that tutorial was. Can't recommend it enough if you're into EDM, or even if you're just into watching people be passionate about the things that they do. Really cool insight into how some amazing music is made. Those are my big takeaways. I'll probably go back and reference this video a few times to see if I can understand a few different things. He also did one on the making of Ex Machina, the title track of that album, so I'll probably go watch that as well. Yeah, this is all I had time for today, though. Watching that tutorial was a good part of the learning process. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.